Well, we want to get into that conversation now with Ross Campbell, who is from the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Wales. Many thanks for joining us this afternoon. And of course, a lot of interest now that Kenya is one of the bright spots in Africa. We did see the IMF indicate that Kenya is going to grow by about 5.9%. And it seems that there's a lot of promise and a lot of prospects. But the downside is public fiscal management has been a big issue where the discourse continues across different levels of government. There's a lot of wastage. There's a lot of unnecessary spending.
Well, thank you, Abby. It's a pleasure to be here today. I think with government spending, I think on average about 49% of global GDP, the government is so intrinsic to good financial management in a country. Even where governments don't control spending directly, they set the rules. As we've just seen from some of your other articles, they regulate and set the conditions. And I think good public financial management, good fiscal management at its best instills confidence and trust, both for investors, for taxpayers, and for business to engage in the economic activity that is the engine of growth and prosperity.
And speaking as an accountant, what is your assessment of accounting standards that different governments in Africa have exhibited?
Well, I think it's early days. Even the countries that have brought in very modern accounting, accruals accounting, such as international public sector accounting standards, have only been doing it for a short while. The leaders in this field tend to be New Zealand, Australia, the UK, Canada, and some of the other European countries. But it's still only really the last 20 years, and I think there's still a lot of learning. Africa, I think, is in a good position to benefit from some of that learning. Hopefully you won't make the mistakes that we made. But I think the advantage of these better standards is it really enables you to understand the assets and the liability picture especially.
And from where you sit, Mr. Campbell, there's a lot of interest now that Africa has a young population compared to the Western countries where there's more of an aging population.
Well, indeed. I mean, in the UK, for example, 54% of what the government spends is on pensions, social welfare and healthcare, most of which, of course, is consumed by the more elderly in the population. In some ways, this is a fantastic situation. We're looking after our old people. But on the other hand, it is a massive liability for the public finances to manage, and is placing, I think, as can be seen in developed countries, a lot of stress on the financial system. I think the key for developing countries with younger populations is to think very carefully about the liabilities they incur as they give social entitlements, and to plan on the basis of understanding those liabilities well, so that they know what revenue they have to be able to fund them in the future.
All right. It's quite an interesting point of information there. And looking at the trends in regard to fiscal management, there's still a big challenge when it comes to accountability.
Indeed.
And of course, the penetration of various funds within the continent. And the international community has been very uneasy, if I may say so, in terms of scaling up funding in the region.
Well, I think ultimately a strong economy runs on trust. Trust in the numbers, trust that people can understand how the money is being spent, and that gives everybody confidence. I think it's difficult to have that kind of level of transparency, accountability and trust without good financial records, and that needs good professionals, strong professional skills, and a strong accountancy profession to be able to deliver it.
All right. And the other big conversation that many people are not having is the financial risks associated with an economy that is growing in terms of its size, but they're not seeing, there's been that challenge of many accounting bodies, to be precise in Kenya, where we have the Institute of Certified Public Accountants, there's also been a lot of collusion among the professionals, where we're seeing there's a lot of pressure from a certain class to live a certain lifestyle. And if you look at the graft cases that Kenya has been facing, accountants are involved, auditors are involved. How do we transition and ensure we have strong institutions that will not fall into the trap of being easily, should I say, misused?
Yeah, I think the important thing is to build within a strong profession a very clear set of ethical codes and to live them. And that means taking action against people who don't live up to those standards and the behaviours that we expect of professionals. I think it's one of those things, it's all very well having rules, but you have to live them. And there has to be seen to be consequences for people who don't meet the very high standards we should expect of our professional accountants and our public servants.
All right. And let me get to another interesting topic, Campbell. There's a lot of interest in terms of financing public infrastructure. And we've seen, for example, the standard gauge railway here in Kenya.
Yes.
It's being financed by the Chinese government to a tune of 85%, whereas Kenya government is contributing 15%. What are sort of the trends we are likely to see now that African governments are alive to the fact that they do not need to tax their populations heavily, but they can look for overseas financing?
Well, I think overseas financing is a legitimate tool to develop infrastructure, as is domestic borrowing. They're widely used, and indeed much infrastructure around the world is financed through loans of one sort or another. I think the thing is to ensure that the projects are structured in such a way that it is very transparent as to where the money is going and how the money is being spent, and that taxpayers can see both that the money is being applied to the project in a correct way, but also the benefits and the returns from the project.
I like that, because at the end of the day, people are keen with the value for money.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
And do you feel this value for money in some of the projects being done in the continent, especially, like I mentioned, we have the SGR, where we paid close to 327 billion shillings. This is not a small amount of money.
No, big infrastructure comes with a big price tag, and that's just one of the realities, I think. I mean, even when we build infrastructure in developed countries like the UK, it certainly is expensive. I think the thing is to understand the whole financial case in terms of the wider economic benefits. Building a railway and opening up markets and facilitating commerce is always going to have a big economic benefit, as is building a road. Governments also are sometimes tempted to engage in vanity projects as well, though. And this is where good
White
transparency...
Elephant project.
Indeed. And this is where good transparency as to not just the costs, but also the economic benefits, publishing the business case, for example, is a good way to demonstrate to people that money is being well spent.
Do you see any gaps in the existing setup we have, and how can we maneuver through this and ensure we have watertight systems?
I think the thing to do is to create a virtuous circle where trust builds on trust. Part of that is strong, independent institutions around the expenditure of public money. I think you have a very strong public auditor in Mr. Edioku, who I'm very pleased to say is one of our members. And I think, there's some good models in Kenya. I think the trick is always the follow through and ensuring that where public money is being spent for the public good, everybody can follow the money.
Everybody can follow the money. And finally, perhaps, looking at Kenya as a country, and there's a lot of opportunity to grow in the accounting profession and also in the bigger body of commerce. Perhaps, what sort of partnerships can Kenya look towards striking with associations like yours in the United Kingdom?
Well, we're very keen to build a world of strong economies. We are very keen to partner with local professional bodies to help share some of the hard-won lessons that we have had. But ultimately, we would like people to hear the word chartered accountant and think that is a trusted person, wherever the word is used, anywhere in the world. And that is the real incentive that I think we all need to work towards. It's having strong, independent professionals that form the foundation of a strong economy.
All right. And many thanks there, Rose Campbell from
Pleasure.
the Institute of Chartered Accountants of England and Wales. A pleasure hosting you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, that has been that interesting conversation on public financing and some of the opportunities that do lie and some of the gaps that exist in the public financial sector. A lot of lessons there to pick up from that conversation, where there's need to build strong institutions and men and women of integrity. Let's get to another story now. And the government has issued 1,000 title deeds to schools across the country. The move aims at affirming the government's commitment in the protection of public schools, land. Today's function comes after the Ministry of Lands, in partnership with the National Lands Commission, the Ministry of Education and the Shule Yangu Alliance, implemented a multi-stakeholder program to audit, survey, protect and title public school land. Cases of school land grabbing are common, and Kenyans can actually attest to this, and can only hope that these efforts will save our learning institutions from private developers.